I hand over the floor to Axel, my founding EIR, former US CEO of Fund of Funds. We have someone, an amazing mentor, who is going to give, there are Samsung. What does it conjure? It conjures changing the world through money and technology and marketing. But there are so many investors, so many Samsung funds. What are the top 3 or 4? So today we are in the next 15 minutes, you would learn how to navigate within the Samsung system from someone who is at the epicenter of it all. Jonathan Charles, welcome.
Thank you so much, Casey. It's a great pleasure to have you here, Jonathan. Don't know whether I actually told you, I had a semiconductor deal, and Samsung was a $5 million investor on that deal at the same time.
Which Samsung fund? Actually, we'll talk about that in a little bit, I think.
You're bringing up your own question first, right? At the time, it was just Samsung Ventures, but you have now split up into several funds. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, and this comes up a lot almost in every meeting we start with. Think about the first meetings we have with entrepreneurs. Samsung's got a very, very big set of businesses. Everything from, what you see at Best Buy, of course, the mobile phones and the tablets. Over on the other side of Best Buy, the washing machines, the refrigerators, all that kind of stuff. But not everybody, most people in Silicon Valley, but not everybody realizes we also do memory chips and other kinds of chips. One of the biggest producers, if not the biggest producer by market share, last time I checked, of solid state drives, flash memory, that kind of stuff. As a result of this behemoth of a giant tech company, we actually have 3 funds. We have Samsung Ventures, which is the oldest of the 3. The quick reference way to check if you're meeting with anybody from Samsung on this, or the way to think about it is, Samsung Ventures typically works with slightly more mature companies that are ready to engage almost immediately with the Samsung business units, and they can typically write bigger checks, and they support not only multiple parts of Samsung Electronics, but they also support parts of the Samsung Group, mainly in Asia. So another kind of trivia fact is that the big giant Samsung businesses also include things like construction and fire and marine insurance and other things, primarily in Asia, which is not as well understood in the West. So that's Samsung Ventures. International operations, of course, investing all over the world. Samsung Next, that's N-E-X-T, Samsung Next, primarily supports Samsung Mobile Division, and what they do is they work on applications and services. They're now doing, think of it as like rapid fire seed level checks pretty quickly. They're located here in Mountain View, but they also do deals in Europe and in Israel as well. And that leaves Samsung Catalyst Fund, where I'm an investment director for the past, well, I've been on the team for the past 9 years. I was the first associate on the team. I missed the early days when there was just 3 of us. It was like a startup inside a big giant company, and we were just boom, 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 trying to get everything done. Just the 3 of us with a couple of support people. But our fund originally started thinking about the areas of, that Samsung was not really strong in or present in. Things like digital health, in those days, IoT, auto tech, consumer electronics, ironically. Samsung makes a lot of those, but Samsung had never really invested in any other consumer electronics companies. Fast forward to just about a year ago, we've gone through a big sort of self-reflection and a strategy change, and now we're primarily focused on semiconductors. For the most part, for the data center. We're also interested in chips and advanced technologies for auto tech as well, so kind of returning to that after a couple of years. And so you can think of Samsung Catalyst Fund, where I work, as a $500 million evergreen deep tech fund focused on, as I described, mainly semiconductors and some auto tech.
If I may ask, where does Marco Cesare fit in?
Yeah, so Marco's actually our new EVP that we report to, and he's also an EVP with Samsung Foundry business, which I'm sorry I failed to mention. We actually have the fabs as well, as you may have seen in the news, all the CHIPS Act and all that kind of stuff. So Marco just joined us about 5-6 months ago, and of course he's a big semiconductor ex-investment banker, and ran I believe Corp Dev and Strategy, to be more precise, at Global Foundry. So, you know, as you can imagine, I'm talking about semiconductors, and our new EVP is a semiconductor expert.
Yeah, and I met Marco because we were together on the board of directors of the company that I mentioned before.
Very good.
We ultimately sold to Intel.
Yeah.
Which was a dreaded experience to begin with, right?
Yeah.
That brings me to the next question, semiconductor. I mean, I remember we had about $120 million in investment in there, no revenue. That is worse than even life science.
Yeah.
So how do you view that world?
Well, you know, just in the last couple of months, I think not only our team, but everybody's sort of reassessing it, right? So the good news in being a strategic investor is, you know, we don't necessarily look for, you know, the big giant financial returns. Of course, as investors, we want to not lose money. We certainly would like to make money to report back to the financial teams in Seoul, back in Korea. But it probably gives us a little more leeway to take risk on earlier stage startups, as long as we think we can find a good syndicate of not only strategics, but also financials. But therein lies the rub. You know, for those of you who were in the room earlier, this phrase doom and gloom came up. You know, on one hand, I'm seeing a lot of that on the front lines. On the other hand, you know, we cannot forget that some very, very big, giant, famous companies were created during recessionary periods and certainly survived recessionary periods, right? You know, Uber, WhatsApp, Stripe, Pinterest, you know, the list goes on and on. Back even earlier than that, Amazon and Google, right? It's been a 13-year bull run. It's been quite the party, and some people are saying this is kind of like a hangover that we're recovering from. For deep tech, what I would say is, in a lot of ways, it's a lot more challenging precisely because of what you mentioned. It's very, very capital intensive. A lot of these companies are not going to see revenues for years. And if I had to pick one headline to kind of describe the macroeconomic situation that has trickled down to the world we all live in, it's let's just say a refocus on business fundamentals. So, you know, just raising giant, massive rounds, and even some semiconductor companies have done this. They may have a huge war chest, but those revenues are far off in the distance. And I've unfortunately seen some pretty well-known chip companies that maybe they're thinking about other strategic options right now because of the funding environment.
Do you think Moore's law is being broken because of financing for startup companies with new ideas can no longer be provided? So Intel and AMD, this is it in the processor world? Because who is going to give another $150 million for a better idea?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that actually correlates to more precisely where we invest. So, okay, we invest in semiconductors. There's more layers to that and some nuance. So what we're really doing is our team is thinking about, you know, what is the future data center look like? What are, you know, we start, just like when you're building a startup, we start our thesis with, you know, what is broken today? What do we think needs to be fixed? How do we think it might be fixed from a theoretical perspective? And then we look at the startups to sort of solve that problem in real time. And so what do we think is broken with you know, Moore's law and all this stuff? Yeah, certainly it's coming to a slowdown. Some say it's already completely slowed down. What we're looking for is next generation architectures, non-von Neumann architectures. We're even looking at analog chips, which who would have thought, you know, analog, really? I thought everything's digital. Nope, analog chips are a thing. We looked at, I can't name names, but we're looking at a company right now that is more set up like the human brain works. And I don't mean from a marketing perspective, I mean actually it literally works more like a human brain. That is completely not x86, if you want to put it that way. So we're looking for what's coming next. Now, some of these technologies, as we've both been talking about, may not come to market for years. But because we're Samsung, because we're corporate and we're strategic, we can be patient. As long as we can find other investors to join and come along on the journey with us, you know, we can try to make that happen and support the entrepreneurs that want to disrupt the chip industry. The other thing I would say is we also see a lot of innovation on other parts of the data center where we can invest as well. So when I say semiconductors, I mean, well, add to that also, sometimes even software if it's not at the application layer, but closer to the bottom of the stack, and if it sort of interfaces and somehow makes better the compute, which I've already described, the networking, the storage, the memory, that could be of interest to us as well, because at the end of the day, you know, think of a data center, right? You've got racks and racks of hardware. A lot of Samsung technology goes in there. Other entrepreneurs want their hardware technology in there. But then software entrepreneurs, and I think, you know, we heard from one earlier today, they can come higher in the stack and they can help to optimize everything at the bottom. On a side note, and I'm probably jumping ahead on the question list, I'll give you an example of this, which is a very interesting company that we invested in called Rescale. And what they do is they're a platform for high performance computing, and they're doing precisely what I described for big enterprise customers for R&D purposes for their engineering teams. They come in, they work with the big cloud providers, AWS, Azure, Oracle, a couple of others, and they want to allow for the R&D engineers who do not want to run their own data centers and mess with all the applications themselves, because that's not their day job. Their day job is to design and build products for big companies. Rescale will come in. They'll sit in the middle as kind of like a platform connecting to over 800 applications at the top. So imagine if you're a Boeing engineer, and by the way, the CEO came from Boeing. He did model wings for aircrafts, I believe the 777, and he realized, I don't want to be running my own little data center at Boeing, so let's create a startup. So talking about, you know, feeling the problem himself and then building a startup around it. He's got a great personal story. And his company Rescale allows for just, you know, a typical R&D engineer to come in and actually be assisted by Rescale to select what kinds of GPUs do I want, what kinds of memory resources do I need, what kind of, you know, everything at the bottom of the stack can I use, oh, by the way, with some pricing and performance information, and almost like flipping a switch, now I can go and model the next generation whatever. Could be the next generation shoe, aircraft, you know, all kinds of products can be modeled with high performance computing and made very simple by a company, key point, which is basically software that we invested in precisely because it touches the bottom of the stack.
Actually, you mentioned now the second or third time in your answer software. I view you personally as a software investor because there's no piece of hardware. You remember the times with resistors and transistors?
Yeah.
Everything is simulated in VHDL. Everything is a software tool chain before it actually becomes a chip.
Yeah.
So you actually have to analyze chip technology today on a software level much more so than on a hardware level. Is that true?
Yeah, I think, you know, like Mark Andreessen said, software is eating the world, right? And there are plenty of software packages that can do, gosh, you know, lots and lots of things, even for foundries and for semiconductor people. And we don't directly invest, at least not right now, in, think of it as like fab software. Maybe we'll get there someday because we're focused on the other areas that I already described. But absolutely, I mean, you know, I'm just on a side note when it comes to software, and I'm sure if there's any VCs in the audience, you've kind of experienced this. You know, I'll give you a specific example, which our fund potentially could even use. In just a few years back, when VCs would kind of model out their investments and their portfolios, it would completely be done in Excel. And just the other day, I've got a friend in my personal network that is raising his own venture fund. And guess what? He's not from a finance background. He's actually a product CEO. He actually runs a startup as well, and a product-focused CEO. And that's his background. He found an online tool to do portfolio construction for a venture capital fund, and he delivered the output and put it in his pitch deck. And I just was blown away. Like, and you know, the product's been out for a couple of years, but amazing, right? So even things that, you know, you wouldn't think are related to R&D, like Rescale for, you know, big Fortune 500 customers, you've even got VCs that are modeling out all kinds of stuff using software. So yeah, software is truly eating the world.
And how much do you spend time in analyzing the CEOs or the team's go-to-market strategy? That is probably the key. Innovation is not the problem, right? There's enough innovation.
Yeah, we see lots of innovation. Yeah, no, that's an interesting point because one of the challenges we have is we come across very, very technical founders. We have a very high percentage of PhDs in our portfolio, and particularly with the earlier stage companies, we've even incubated seed level companies. For example, a silicon photonics company called Avicenna, which is doing really well. We expect their technology to work, and they're really going to disrupt chip-to-chip interconnect in the data center. But it's kind of interesting, when you work with first-time CEOs or first-time entrepreneurial teams, and if they are typically more technical, yeah, you do have to roll up your sleeves and you really kind of have to work with them and assess, what is that go-to-market strategy? Because as, a lot of us in the audience know, the semiconductor industry and then the cloud industry is kind of complicated, right? It's not always intuitive. There are many different layers. There are many different parts of the value chain. Certainly there are many kinds of customers, lots of different kinds of use cases. And, it's not like one chip fits all and you just sell it for one price to everybody and you market it off your website. It doesn't work like that, right? So yeah, we do spend, particularly again with the earlier stage companies, a lot of time on go-to-market strategies.
So when we go away from processor technology, like an Intel chipset, what other areas are financially still feasible to go after?
Yeah, it depends how you define financially feasible, right? Again, I think for this sort of deep tech investing, or I would say all of deep tech investing really, you've got to have a lot of patience and a lot of wherewithal to be able to either participate in follow-on rounds or basically have an understanding that just like with other companies, things can get delayed and whatnot. But as they say, hardware is hard. So I think you have to have even tighter discipline and resolve to stick to it. Deep tech investing is not for the faint of heart, right? And a lot of investors, a little Silicon Valley history, a lot of the venture industry actually started with basically what we now call deep tech, right? Back in the late 50s and early 60s, a lot of defense-related stuff, a lot of hardware, but hardware is hard. There isn't typically recurring revenues with very high growth. It's a tough, brutal business, and so, the financial feasibility is, well, it depends who you are, how deep are your pockets, how much you actually understand the complicated industry and market dynamics, as I was sort of alluding to earlier. And, but the good news is when you have a hit in deep tech, it can hit pretty big, right? So I'll give you an example. We had a company out of our Israel office called Habana Labs. They got picked up by Intel for, I believe, it was around just under $2 billion. And the company, relatively speaking, wasn't that old. It wasn't 18 months old, but it wasn't like 20 years old. It wasn't 15 years old, if I remember correctly. That wasn't a deal I worked on. I typically focus on deals in the United States. Of course, our Israel team handles not only Israel, but also Europe. But for our team, that was a huge hit. And if we were financial investors, I think we would have been pretty, even extra pleased, and we would have reported that back to our LPs. In our case, of course, we're off balance sheet, and all of our money comes from Samsung.
The reason why I brought up go-to-market strategy, in my personal opinion, and I can be wrong, but digital. Cisco wouldn't exist if digital would have known what they had in their switching and routing products, right? You remember those times, and they were a much better product than the initial Cisco products that came out, and they completely messed it up. It's a bankrupt company, doesn't exist anymore, and that's based on go-to-market strategy alone, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, look, whether it's deep tech or something else, your go-to-market strategy, I don't want to say it's the be-all, end-all because it's a multi-dimensional problem to solve for, but I've seen lots of, even outside of my day job, I've seen lots of really interesting use cases, technologies, very interesting teams, and and they'll unfortunately not have the right go-to-market strategy, and they die, right? The reality is probably all of us know is, the startup world with the venture capital ecosystem, you know, it's very Darwinian, right? It's survival of the fittest. It's just a cold hard reality. And kind of circling back to sort of where we started, you know, now that the 13-year, you know, giant party's over, maybe some of this Darwinian sort of natural selection processes for startups, and also for investors, if you kind of think it through, that's what we're kind of returning to. That's how I sort of see it. Doesn't mean it's all over, doesn't mean it's all doom and gloom, because again, some very huge, well-known, multi-billion-dollar companies were created during very tough times and survived recessions and all that kind of thing, maybe precisely because it's Darwinian, survival of the fittest.
And by the way, there is this old stock market philosophy, buy low, sell high.
Yeah,
the investors try to stay on the sideline when it actually you can get much better deals right now.
Trust me, you know, I'll refer back to my my friend who's raising a fund right now, which one could immediately say, oh, it's a really tough time to raise a venture capital fund. Well, let me tell you, he's got a whole slide in his deck that talks about buy low, sell high. That's actually the headline. And he's got like stock charts and all, and it's like, yeah, well, after really super high valuations for companies that frankly didn't even have revenue or a path to revenue, or poor go-to-market strategies, you know, that's getting reset right now. I just had dinner the other day with a very well-known SaaS investor, and right when we sat at the table, I said, so tell me, what are you seeing? Is it matching what I'm hearing in the news? You know, I'm not a SaaS investor, but he said, yes, SaaS valuations down, right? And because you can look at the publicly traded SaaS companies and see that they're down, what, 30-ish%, you know, give or take 5 or 10 points, depending on which part of SaaS, but yeah, it's down. Right? So one could argue that, well, yeah, maybe they've been inflated too long and now we're getting back, you know, G said earlier today from Micron, yeah, it's kind of like, well, look at it the other way. Maybe we're just getting back to normal.
Thank you that you say this, right? For example, even in the real estate business, the people say, oh, we can no longer buy real estate. Why? Because they had 13 years, 0% interest rates.
Yeah,
that was not
going to get inflated.
Now you have to learn how to do business again.
Yeah.
Right? And the CEOs in the room that all are trying to raise funding, my advice is take a deal that you can get, the golden rule. Those who have the gold rule, right?
Yeah,
so,
yeah, the pendulum I think is definitely swinging. You know, I'll definitely speak for deep tech again. I keep hearing almost on a weekly basis about companies that have thrown their valuation expectations out the window and are, again, even now considering other strategic options. That's code for M&A. And so corporate speak. So, you know, and these were companies that may have been in, you know, the likes of TechCrunch articles as little as 9 months ago or 2 years ago, and you know, they were AI chips and super sexy and all this kind of stuff, and now the world has changed, right? And you know, I think we all have to look at that with eyes wide open, without getting, you know, over emotional one way or the other. You know, here's a question I ask all my VC friends: do you come across CEOs and of startups that quite haven't grasped the situation? And the answer is a little mixed. Some tell me, all the CEOs I come across, they get it. But I hear from others, yeah, everybody says, oh yeah, I get it, except that doesn't apply to my startup, right? And no, it probably does apply to your startup. But again, earlier, if you were here, somebody was also talking about the great companies can always raise money. That I absolutely believe in as well, right? Maybe terms are a little different than they would be, you know, 8, 9, 10 months ago if you're a rock star company, but you know, a Darwinian, great companies will survive.
I know precisely, and by the way, it's not an age question. I'm sitting on an M&A deal right now where the seller is off by over $150 million.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
There is no deal happening, right? Yeah. Because everybody who does the financial math, yeah, I don't care that you have 2 good quarters. That doesn't establish a trend. And so how do you bridge this gap, right? Eventually you have to walk away from the deal.
Yeah, you know, and I think, you know, for certain people and for certain types of companies, the macro change, it may take a little longer to kind of trickle through. Again, talking to a friend of mine the other day about pre-seed and seed deals, and you know, if you pick your favorite VC kind of podcast, and you'll hear this topic, you know, very popular topic right now, and you'll hear everything from, yeah, it started with the growth capital investors on this side that were crossover funds, so they've lost a lot of money on their public stocks, so naturally they've retracted and they're looking for better deals, or they're just slowed down and they're waiting, and then, you know, and that's going to trickle down all the way eventually to seed and pre-seed. So when it comes to the earlier stage stuff, a little bit of a mixed bag. I am hearing that, again, yeah, some valuations are coming down, definitely for Series A, maybe for some of the seed. Pre-seed, TBD, I was just reading a PitchBook report the other day saying that that hasn't hit yet. That report's about a month old. I'm really excited to see the Q4 data, to see how this is playing out. But unfortunately, it takes a month or two for, you know, all these big reports to be published. So we won't see that till probably late January or early February.
Casey, since I don't watch the clock, do we have time for one or two audience questions?
We have hit it, but just hold it. We have to make roll call of 2 investors. Is Thomas Fools, are you here? Thomas, are you here? Is Jason Novak here? Okay, is Otela from HP Ventures, is she here? You're here, all right, come forward. And so now, okay, so we will do HP and JetBlue after this.
Yes, absolutely.
And also, I'll ask one comment come question.
Sure.
Since you, JC, you mentioned most of your founders are in San Jose area. We have luminaries from San Jose State University here, Innovation Department, and they want to really help the ecosystem, funnel state of CA, governor's office funds, mentoring. So what do you think, can you, and one of them is Michael Cohen and Edgar. So really,
Michael, yeah.
So can you give, how can they help your company?
Yeah, sure. Why don't we connect when I get off the stage here? We can chat for a few moments.
Okay. That sounds great.
Great.
All right.
So anybody from the audience, one question?
What was the name of that software you mentioned? You love the blue is mine.
Oh, sorry, the venture capital portfolio construction one. Yeah, it's called. It's got a funky spelling. It's like tactic.io. Very odd spelling, but if you kind of search roughly around that and venture capital portfolio construction, it should pop up. If you want to chat real quick afterwards, I can look through my phone and probably get you the correct, really interesting spelling.
So my final question to you is, because every CVC wants to be dealt with differently, how would you like to be preferred to be contacted? Through introductions, so warm introductions, or people can reach out to you directly?
Yeah, warm introductions I think are always best. You know, the deep tech community is kind of small, to be honest. You know, it's not, in terms of number of people involved, it's nowhere near the size of, say, SAS. But I can also be reached at letter J, letter N, .Charles, my last name, at Samsung.com. And yeah, happy to talk to those deep tech companies out there that are thinking about the data center and really deep tech, auto tech, sensing sort of technologies and applications.
Thank you so much. It was a great pleasure to have you here today. And my next guest, because I have 3 in a row, is Otelia from HP Ventures. Nice to see you in person.
These chairs are kind of high.
Yes. So, the most amazing thing is that you have, besides the venture role, you have another role in HP. Tell us about it.
Right. So, hello everyone, and first of all, well, nice to be here. Thank you for hosting this event. I would love to understand more about how you maintain and grow the community. I think it's a great job that you are doing right here. And that's right. So I am part of HP Tech Ventures, which is the investing arm of HP Inc. But besides that, I'm also the chair of HP's Women's Network, which is pretty much it's HP's women's club, let's say so. And the reason why we do this is because we are trying to build a culture at our company where we promote women in tech and women in leadership position. And I think that, well, I personally love working for HP from that standpoint because, to be honest, we are a very equitable company. And if you look, for instance, at the board of directors, 6 are female and 7 are men. I think that's pretty rare to find. Oh, that's not me, by the way, but that's all right. She looks like me. She is my co-worker from Israel. Her name is Maya. But that's
that was on the internet under your picture.
Was it?
Yes.
Oh.
I'm so sorry.
That's so interesting. That was a mishap.
That was a Google indexing problem.
Interesting. Oh, okay. Well, I look like this, not like that, but that's all right. So for us, we are really trying. I think a lot of the company culture, it really comes from the employees and how we perceive this whole gender equality and all of that in our company. And we have networks like the Women's Club exists in every single largest hub for HP. And the point is to really create a community where you can, I mean, first of all, you can talk, you can become friends, you can support each other, and also you can find role models. So one of the things that I started when COVID hit, and that's because COVID started, we couldn't meet in person anymore, and I think there was a general demoralization happening by everybody just being at home and so on. So I started to do a series of fireside chats with the highest, toppest female leaders I could find. So we had all the C-level executives from HP. We had a couple of the board directors from HP. And we had other senior leaders from other companies. And the purpose was to show, even though virtual, that whatever the career aspirations are, whatever the path that one wants to do, I mean, it is possible. And the people who are the toppest, either female or male, they are just people who went for similar challenges and similar pathways. And that program was really, really successful, and we had so many attendees, and we're still running that. I'm still interviewing and bringing in interesting speakers every month. Just to, I really do think there is a lack of female role models, a big lack there. So we're trying to do our part to show that there are female role models, and we need to elevate them and show them, and they need to talk to everybody.
Yeah, Deborah, is she in here? No. Deborah and I had also our regular quarantine sessions over Zoom. Yeah, she was in Silicon Valley, I'm down in Playa Vista, and that's how we bridged the time to still be in touch. So that was a great program that you put out. Now let me ask you, in the investment side, how many women deals do you see as a percentage of all the deals that come through?
Very few, and that's because I look at deep tech. I look at manufacturing, like I am focused on manufacturing and deep tech. So in these areas, naturally, there are very few female founders, unfortunately, because we still need to promote more women going into STEM and also women starting companies. So I don't know the exact percentage, but I mean, it's very rare when I talk to women founders.
Do you think this is a systemic problem? If we would help women to understand the opportunities earlier on, that you would see more women founders even in deep tech?
Yeah, I totally think that's a cultural and systemic problem, and we see a lot of different initiatives, and including what we are doing at my company, trying to promote young girls choose to go into engineering degrees, choose to go to do their PhDs later on, so choose to be entrepreneurs. This is all, I think it's a cultural shift that is happening, but it's more work that is needing to be done. And that's a systemic kind of problem.
My experience was that with the Russian culture, you have many more women in PhD levels and thinking about startup companies, right?
You're hitting a personal, like a personal anecdote, I guess. I'm not from Russia, I'm from Moldova. That's a small country in Eastern Europe. It's next to Ukraine and Romania. You know, I come from a different culture. I'm not American. And when I came here, for me, like the whole topic about gender equality and all of that was, to be honest, something rather new. And the first thing that I realized is that when I was growing up in Moldova and just being from there, I never asked myself, or I never thought to myself that I can or cannot do something because I'm a woman or a man. Like, this thought never occurred. And it's you know, I don't want to go into philosophical or political aspects of it, but it is partly because the culture, you know, was impacted by communism, right? So it was this equality that wasn't promoted decades ago. And it's true, like, you know, all the female in my family, they are very strong women, independent. I mean, we're having a president that is a woman right now. I mean, it's very different. So we just don't talk about that. We don't even talk about women or men, to be honest. Like, there is no, it's all about what's the career choice. What do you want to do? What kind of director do you want to be?
What do you bring to the table? That is more important
Exactly.
than what gender, or we had yesterday even a discussion panel that was about inclusivity and diversion. That includes actually also women. So yesterday I unveiled the statistics. Women are about 50% of the population, but they receive 6% of the venture funding in Silicon Valley. And this is not just deep tech, it's across the board, right? So there's a problem. And if I speak from my own experience, then I can say that actually in both areas there are different aspects that need to come together to find solutions. If we suppress one side or force women to compete on the men's turf, it's a failing value proposition, not just for the woman, but for society as well. What's your opinion there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex topic. It's delicate. There are so many different aspects to it, and I do think that funding women entrepreneurs is a bit of a double sword edge. Because, and there is some research that came up this year or something like that. They were like counting how many, so early stage female investors investing in female entrepreneurs, turns out that the rate of those female entrepreneurs continuing to raise money is much lower. And that's because there is some sort of assumption that female investors offer some preferred treatment to female entrepreneurs. So we start to see this debate where it's like, well, it's harder to raise money from male VCs, but at the same time, raising money from female VCs may lead to the fact that it will be unlikely for you to raise in the future again. So you know, this doesn't mean that female VCs don't need to invest anymore in female entrepreneurs. It is an ongoing cultural shift that I think that we are already building, and it's gonna take some time. We still need more women in venture, writing checks. The truth is that, you know, all of the statistics can be skewed in so many different ways. If you look at different researches, you will see that, oh, female partners are anything in between 5% to 15%. So no one knows really how many female partners are out there, but the number is much smaller than male partners. I think there is Babson College has a very good research called the Diana Project, and I think they're the most reliable source out there. Unfortunately, they didn't do any very recent statistics. However, in 2014, they estimated that there are 6% of women partners in venture, and that's down from 10% in 1999. There is a good chance that the trend is actually not going up but down, and the women writing checks overall as a percentage are lowering. And also, this information, I think, is skewed because all of these large funds that put women with a title of a partner, the truth is that those women do not write checks. Especially recently, you'll see so many young women hired into the top firms with titles partners. If you talk to them, they are not decision makers. They don't write the checks. So all of the statistics, it's, you have to kind of think critical about that. And overall, though, we have all these complex aspects of the issue, I still am optimistic, and I believe that we are living in a great moment right now, because we are seeing little by little progress in some cultural shifts that is happening.
You see, one interesting statistics that I would like to bring to the table. When you are actually reacting to something out of your gut instinct, you're 75% of the time right. If you think long enough about the problem, you're only 25% of the time right.
As they say that the best decision is the one you make in the first 10 seconds.
Absolutely correct. And it is my perception that from the education and upbringing level, women are much better in tune with their emotions and the feelings, and could make actually the better decisions in the first 10 seconds if they are not forced to justify and think all through the process. So there is an advantage.
I hope so. I never thought about that, to be honest, but if you think that's right, I will take it. Why not?
We have female founders here in the audience. Any questions?
Yeah, Tracy, you have to ask a question.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I dropped women-owned off my pitch deck. I don't even do that. I don't say that the majority women-owned anymore. It makes the discussion odd in the process, and then it just doesn't feel right. How do you recommend we go about finding, women founders go about finding those that are really interested in actually writing checks?
Sorry, what was the last two words that you said? Finding the women who are...
Writing checks, yeah. How do you go about finding someone who's actually interested in funding women founders?
Well, I don't think there is a secret. It's like finding an investor, right? It's not like, oh, there are a group of women sitting there just waiting to write the checks. I think that it's true. I did notice that lately a lot of the founders and investors, they just drop the word women. And I totally understand it. We are just people, right? That we are working in different professions. It's not about, I don't think that the right question is really to find women who write checks, but it's focusing on what you're doing and what you're bringing to the table, like your point earlier, right? And those women who write checks and have the right intentions, they will find you as an entrepreneur that they will believe in, and they will invest in you, right? So it's pretty much the fact that you dropped the women from the pitch deck. I think that was just the right thing to do, to be honest.
So I asked this also the previous presenter, and if people want to reach you, number one, what are the precise subject matters you are interested in? And number two, should there be a warm introduction, or can they reach you direct?
Right. So as I mentioned, I focus on manufacturing and deep tech. I also do sustainability. There are some specific things that I'm looking for to help HP advance our sustainability goals. Especially around new materials and replacing plastic. So everything that can replace plastic, please let me know if you know of any kind of great technology, new material out there. And of course, warm introductions are always better, but I'm open to any cold outreach because it's hard to get warm introductions all the time, and there might be some really amazing company out there that will just outreach to me via, a cold message, and I'm fine with that.
I have to add this. So two of my highest level non-introductions were that I needed to speak to John Chambers, and I went to a conference, went to the back of the green room, and I called him, and I got into Cisco. And the other one was that the second in command of Motorola, and I couldn't get an appointment with him, so I asked the secretary, which flight is he on? I booked a seat next to him, and that worked then as well.
That's a great story.
An entrepreneur needs to go to that length of detail if you really want it.
And I have to endorse whatever Otela says is real because I cold emailed her. And that's why she's here.
That's true.
I mean, we know most of these CVCs over years, but we needed few more. And you are one of the very few who responded via cold. So you put the money where the mouth is.
And by the way, an old wound of IBM, but you remember his name, Ikabuchi, the head of the OS2 division. And when they had to spin out because everything was dropped, Microsoft dropped them as well. He was parking himself in front of the Microsoft office for 4 weeks until he got the appointment and rescued the company. I mean, this is how you have to do this, yeah?
Absolutely, and you know, I cold emailed myself in my life, so that's why I'm open to cold reaching out too.
It is such a pleasure to have had you. And
thank you. I actually wanted to say just one thing at the end. I really encourage all women to be more open to each other. I think that men are much more open to each other and they help each other always. And when they are, you know, they talk money, they talk numbers. It's a bit different. And I feel like we don't do this enough of each other. And I really hope we can do more.
I have to disagree. I actually find that women can easier talk about emotions when you
Numbers
go to...
Numbers and money, not emotions.
Okay, fine, but... Good point. So...
and I'll leave you with that.
We are leaving with that. Thank you so much. And now we come to my next guest, and I need to basically find it on the slide. Here we are, Jim Lockhart. And Jim, we can dive into the topic. You are working actually for a female CEO, right, in your fund? Or has this changed?
President, yes.
President, yes.
Yes, and the former president was also female. Actually, the founder of JetBlue Ventures was female, Bonnie Simi.
Yeah, Bonnie Simi, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Which a tremendous career, right? Flight attendant at one point in time.
Well, she was actually a United pilot, and then she left
United pilot
to go be a JetBlue pilot, and,
okay.
and then worked her way through the ranks and ended up as the head of talent, the head of people at JetBlue before starting JetBlue Ventures.
So I can actually say, now there was a formal introduction, you're working for JetBlue, you are my mint guest. Pun intended. Does anybody know why I say this? JetBlue, originally a low-cost carrier, then invented the Mint class for about 1/3 of the price that all the standard airlines are flying. And this morning I read an article that American Airlines is abandoning the first class because nobody is buying the seats. They have the wrong conclusion. American had always the wrong conclusion. The prices were too high. Not nobody would buy it. It's the prices are too high. That's what the problem is. Yeah. So, but welcome today, and tell me about JetBlue Ventures.
Yeah, happy to. Well, thank you very much for having me. So, I'm an investor with JetBlue Ventures. Have been for about 3.5 years now. Our group, obviously, we are the CVC arm of JetBlue. If you don't know JetBlue that well, we fly about 40 million passengers a year, a lot of transcontinental flights, a lot of Caribbean, some South America, now flying to London as well. JetBlue Ventures was founded in 2016. The idea came out of an executive session at the airline, thinking about what can JetBlue do to continue being innovative. What can JetBlue do to not overlook early stage technologies that could be impactful? And this idea came out that, well, maybe a CVC, maybe a venture firm would be a way to do this. And what they decided to do was to do it as a subsidiary, fully separate from JetBlue, located in San Francisco in Silicon Valley. And so that's how we got started. And I should say, you know, we are a strategic investor. And what strategic means for us is that we do need to have some kind of use case or some kind of idea for how this could benefit JetBlue, how there could be a potential partnership, maybe a startup could be a customer to JetBlue, or maybe JetBlue is using their technology, but there does need to be some connection, but there doesn't have to be a commercial contract or a commercial agreement. We're not so strategically handcuffed where we're only allowed to make an investment if there's some kind of commercial deal being done. And I think that's important in the CVC world, because I think the odds of your parent company being ready to do a deal or a POC with a company right when they're also raising their seed or Series A or whatever at the same time is kind of low. So it gives us the creativity to look for companies that we think are best in breed, try and introduce them to the airline, and hopefully that, you know, build a relationship there. So the type of investments that we make, we are seed through, you know, seed and Series A is most common for us. 500K to a few million is probably a good range. We will do something as late as, you know, a Series B. That's probably as late as we'd go. We don't typically lead rounds. We're pretty much always working in a syndicate with other investors. And we do pretty much always require a board observer role, though, because we are trying to build a partnership with any company that we work with, and we're trying to make sure that they eventually could become a, you know, a JetBlue business partner in some way, and we're trying to introduce them to other people in the travel industry, other corporates in the travel industry. The other thing I would say is, you know, we want the world to think of us as a travel industry investor. So there's a lot more than just commercial aviation. We do have our investment categories broken down on our website. They're clearly defined, but one of them is around customer experience. And that's so, you know, how do people get inspired for their travel? Where do they book it? Is it some new app? Is it a new OTA, or is it direct booking? What else do they do outside of out of the air travel? Tourism, activities, events. Another area for us is hospitality, as that's just a large component of anyone's travel. We also look at enterprise tech, and that's, you know, regular business functions as well as all of the niche airline stuff like aircraft maintenance, you know, scheduling, route management, revenue management, loyalty, all these things. And then I think what we're here to talk a bit more about today is sustainability and climate tech, kind of a catch-all. And what we do here is we think about, you know, one, how do we broadly try to help decarbonize aviation? And then also, how do we help JetBlue meet their net zero by 2040 goal, which is a pretty difficult task for many industries, but I think particularly difficult in aviation because almost all of our emissions are scope 1. They're all from jet fuel, right? There's a lot. There's not a lot you can do outside of jet fuel, but we're trying to do a lot.
But one way of decarbonizing, you remember this country was built on railroad lines, and the failure of the railroad lines didn't understand that flying was part of the transportation business. This can change again, right? So that high-speed rail between San Francisco and San Diego, Los Angeles in there could be the next level of air travel just on the ground. Lufthansa actually had a train between Düsseldorf and Frankfurt at one point in time, and there was completely financed, and there was an airplane ticket that you had, or a segment of an airplane ticket. How do you view this from an investment point of view?
I can say I don't think about train versus air often, so I don't think I have a ton of expertise to shed on this. But what I would say is that for us, you know, we're looking at other types of alternatives. So something that we look at a lot is alternative propulsion systems or alternative fuel systems, right? We've made investments in this space, which I'm happy to go over a little bit, but in aviation, you've got kind of a spectrum of alternative or cleaner propulsion systems that people are working on, and there's kind of a range of what they could be good for. With electricity, you know, battery-powered aircraft being, right now at least, best suited to, you know, small aircraft, general aviation, the budding eVTOL world, where you're trying to go less than, you know, maybe 100 miles total. You know, electric battery-powered flight could be really good for that. You start going up the chain. We are an investor in Joby, by the way, which is one of the eVTOL companies that was pure electric, and they've gone public now through a SPAC. But the reason why we invested in them was because we wanted to make an investment in the progression of all-electric propulsion in aviation. They could also be a revenue partner for JetBlue, but that's a little off topic. But then when you start going up the distance, right, we have to look for other solutions, and maybe the next one is we could go into hybrids. That can help us get into the middle range, maybe even further, but what we think some of the most interesting areas is green hydrogen. The concept has been around for a long time, but there's a lot of barriers to using it. There's a lot of barriers in production, there's a lot of barriers in transportation and usage, but that doesn't mean that we think it shouldn't be gone after. So we invested in a company called Universal Hydrogen, and the CEO of Universal Hydrogen, he was formerly the CTO of Airbus, he was the CTO of United Technologies at one point, and he basically left that world to say, or with the idea of he wanted to go work on what is the thing that he thinks could help decarbonize aviation the fastest. And through their analysis, he's got a really strong team. Their analysis, they said, they think it is green hydrogen. The problem with green hydrogen right now, for one, there's not enough being produced anywhere in the world, but if it was being produced, it's really difficult to store. It's always basically over-pressurizing its containers. We don't have great storage systems for it. It's going to be too expensive to try and put into existing pipelines or put new pipelines in everywhere. There's all these infrastructure problems, and then there's also no powertrains that can use it anyways. So what they said, well, why don't we develop a container system that can store longer than anything that's on the market right now? Why don't we develop a powertrain system that can work in aircraft, starting out with fuel cells and regional aircraft, and just, for now at least, transport all of that green hydrogen on the intermodal freight network that already exists. Instead of trying to say, oh, we have to redo all of the airports and turn them into hydrogen hubs. I hope that happens someday, but it's going to be ungodly expensive. He's saying hydrogen's going to be made in these renewable energy places where renewable energy is the cheapest, where you've got hydro, where you've got good wind, where you've got good solar. Make green hydrogen in these mega facilities and then just transport it as needed, and they're doing really well.
12 years ago, I wrote the business plan for this, because what I found out, wind is always available where you don't need it and when you don't need it. So what's the best solution? I wrote co-hosting a hydrogen plant and take 100%, instead of feeding it to the grid, use 100% of the energy and put it into hydrogen production. That would be actually the idea, and then you only have to solve the transportation problem of the fuel cells ultimately to the destinations, right?
Yeah, definitely. And the thing I didn't mention also is why hydrogen in the first place. The idea of using hydrogen for propulsion has been around a long time. If you compare it to jet fuel, it's got about 3 times the energy stored in it. But then, as I mentioned, there's just a lot of trouble in generating and transporting it and using it. But the other thing about that is, why hydrogen over batteries is hydrogen will take up a lot of space to store, but it's a lot lighter than putting in battery infrastructure. Once you get over a certain size and weight on batteries and on an all-electric aircraft, your range is just out the door and you can't do it. So hydrogen is one of the things that we think can actually do medium, and maybe someday with combustible hydrogen, even long-range air travel.
So the regulatory process, we love them, right? All the time. What do you think the delay time will be if somebody has a feasible solution to get actually into operation?
So whenever I meet entrepreneurs who are doing things in aviation, especially in new propulsion systems or kind of deep tech, I'm always like a little bit worried for them, just because I think it's so hard to do, so hard to fundraise, because not only do you have to fundraise a significant amount of money, but you have to think about these massive walls of money you're going to need later to get certified with the FAA. Just about anything that you're doing is going to be very expensive. New aircraft can literally cost billions of dollars to get all the way through. New propulsion systems can cost hundreds of millions of dollars easy to get through. I think the FAA is doing a great job, though. I think they can be better. I hope they can be better. But we also can't say that, the FAA needs to get rid of all these processes. The reason why we have such a safe air travel system in the world is because of the FAA and other regulatory governing bodies around the world. We need aviation to be incredibly safe. And so I wish it could be cheaper and faster, but the FAA does a great job making sure that we're safe, and that's really important.
Now, is there new product and companies you're looking for that are based by demands that you actually became now a much larger airline through the merger with Spirit?
I don't think that's changed anything for us, and hopefully, it doesn't get blocked by the DOJ, which is always a possibility.
Well, that is not true yet?
Well, it got okayed by the shareholders for Spirit, but now we have to see if everything goes through. I don't think that's really changed, but maybe it will. I think the main thing that hasn't really changed is that we need, more sustainable aviation fuel in whatever form that we can get it, because when we're looking at battery, we're looking at hydrogen, these different things, those are still going to take a lot more certification. Sustainable aviation fuel is just starting to be put onto the map more. I think there's something like 5 million gallons being used in the US right now, not a whole lot. But that is something that is approved, that is certified, that can be used. Of course, you've got a lot of problems with feedstock with that. A lot of it's made from bio-derived sources, agriculture, or oils, cooking oils and stuff like that are used from restaurants, all that kind of stuff. The feedstock is very competitive. What I would say is there's a lot of innovations and fascinating stuff being done in this space that would be considered power to fuels, right? And it's taking CO2 and it's making sustainable aviation fuels out of it. And I think this is one of the most exciting areas for us. We've invested in a company that we're really excited about called Air Company, which is out of Brooklyn, New York. And that's what they do. So they take basically CO2 and they take renewable electricity and they take water. They generate their own hydrogen on site, but it's hydrogen and it's CO2 into this system of reactors and catalysts, and on the other end they can produce ethanol, and they can also produce paraffins, and they can make jet fuel. A few weeks ago they had a big announcement in New York where they announced their sustainable aviation fuel product, and they announced an offtake agreement with JetBlue, offtake agreement with Virgin Atlantic, with Boom, and also successful test flights with the US Air Force. But that is a space that I would love to continue to see innovations in, even if it's kind of across that value chain. Like direct air capture could be an interesting category for us, mostly if we're thinking about companies like Air Company need more cheap sources of CO2 to make their products. So we kind of start thinking about what else can we do to help support that whole area, that whole supply chain.
Absolutely fantastic. Do we have any question? By the way, in the back room, can we be a little bit more silent? It really is disturbing here on the stage. Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Yes, please.
I mean, I'm sure that, I imagine that would take a whole new certification process, but I know that there's a big ammonia versus hydrogen argument out there, and that you can use, a lot of existing, fuel transportation systems for ammonia that you can't use for hydrogen. I can't say that I've done a super deep dive on it, but I know that that idea is out there, and it could have a lot of merit. Yeah.
One last question, please.
It is. So there's a couple different visions of the world out there, and I think they'll both happen. One of them is that airports could be good locations for hydrogen hubs, where they put in actual, electrolyzers and they generate hydrogen on site, and then maybe they'll use that. I've talked to airport owner-operators, and some of them have ran numbers, and they've said it's too expensive and we don't have the space to make that happen, so we're going to have to get it from somewhere. And then if you think about, well, how do you get it? Well, you could think about like pipelines. There's a whole nother set of difficulties that come along with pipelines, whether it's new ones or trying to reuse old ones, and recompression and all these different things. So yes, I think certain airports could become hydrogen hubs, and that'll be great. And in other cases, there'll be a mass green hydrogen production facility, and then you're going to transport that where it needs to go, whatever's most economical to do that.
By the way, as a knowledge piece, baggage handlers and the ones which drive the baggage to the plane and back, are they actually airport employees or airline employees?
That just depends on the airport and on the region. Things are done very differently around the world as they are in the United States. It could be airport employees. It could be, they call them, into-plane agents, or these operational companies that handle all of this. And in some cases, it's actually airline employees too. It's a hard question to answer.
Yeah, no. We had in Pitch Global once a company that had robotized the entire carts and the loading and offloading of the plane, which reduced people, and actually had a much faster operations.
Yeah, I've actually seen several of those companies, and I continue to hope that they can kind of pull it off and make the unit economics work better. and the ROI for the airline, because we've brought in several of them to pitch, and really when it got down to it with the operational managers, and the operational managers ran their numbers and they just didn't think it would work out. They thought it would be too expensive or it'd be too disruptive.
And the other thing that when you see, especially people that don't fly that often, they are sitting in their seats, does my luggage make it to the destination, and where is my luggage? Emirates Airline tried to experiment with tagging them with Bluetooth receivers, and had receivers also in the plane, so you could oversee on your phone where your luggage was, right? Any movement in this area?
Well, actually, I think the interesting thing to comment on is that everybody's been using AirTags, Apple AirTags, which are these $30 devices that can speak to any Apple device within, like, I don't know, 500 feet or something, and then it updates Apple, which then sends that big information back over to you. So everyone started using these recently, but then there was a few airlines, I think Lufthansa might have been one of them, that actually was trying to say that these devices are not allowed because they could interfere with transmissions and signals from the aircraft. And I think what actually happened is that the airline was tired of people knowing exactly where their bags were. But I know that the FAA at least just recently came out and said, no, Apple AirTags do not pose any threat to aircraft operations. So, well, it's an interesting topic to watch.
One of my customers was the Air Force, and they had in southern Illinois, is a big Air Force base, Scott Air Force Base, and they had researched the alleged interference of cell phones during flight. There is none. They have 100% verified. So the reason why that isn't allowed, because you can ping more than one tower at 10, 20,000 feet. And so they, once in a while, I keep my thing always on because I know nothing can happen. So the text message once in a while gets through. But you could also invest in capturing the cell towers inside the plane, right? And can redirect it over satellite. What's happening in this field?
Yeah, that's an interesting area. I've been pitched several companies like this. I haven't really seen any of them make a whole lot of progress, though. I mean, so the idea is, we've got all these planes up there. Why isn't it kind of like a mesh network of cell towers, and we could do a backbone of communications using aircraft? I've seen some good, credible sounding pitches. We decided to pass for one reason or another, and I haven't really seen it come to fruition yet anywhere. The other interesting part of that was the pitch was, well, the airlines could also be like a rev share partner of this, right? You're providing that background so you can make money off of this. What it looks like to me is that probably, Starlink and maybe, whoever's after Starlink who's successful enough to do it are probably going to be the new providers to airlines.
There has happened a shift in Wi-Fi technology, right? I remember 5, 6, 7 years ago, smoke signals were faster than the Wi-Fi in most airplanes, but that has changed. There is actually pretty decent Wi-Fi now on most planes nowadays, right?
Yeah, and I mean that's JetBlue. That's what they've been selling for over a decade is the free Wi-Fi that's available. It's funny. I'm a West Coast person, Oregon and California my whole life, and I just started flying JetBlue a few years ago in connection with this job. But I was so pleasantly surprised to find out it's actually a really great airline, a really great product, and having good Wi-Fi is actually pretty important to that.
Anybody who needs to go transcontinental, I can only recommend the Mint class. Yeah. Out of 5 meal choices, you can pick 3, right? You will be actually offered a welcome drink, which is a type of not margarita, but similar, with a piece of mint in there. Excellent service. And I don't want to make advertising for airlines per se, but this has changed the airline industry. They innovated in that space too.
Yeah, no, they definitely did. They're offering a premium product at less than you're going to pay than, an American or United for a business class. Everybody loves it. Everybody raves about it. Everybody takes pictures and posts it on social media because it's a great product. But I'd also say that compare like the economy, the core cabin of JetBlue to the other airlines. If you're flying transcontinental, you have way more space, and you got like free good snacks as much as you want. It's a much better experience.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
It was a great pleasure.
Yeah.
And hope to see more of you.
And on that question of how to reach out, Jim at JetBlue Ventures, or go to our website, and there's our contact email. We're always
no warm introductions.
No, we're happy to do warm or cold, really, right? I've done them both, and happy to get a warm one. But if you don't know anyone, just reach out to us. We'll take a look.
Thank you so much.